Well, welcome all of you who are joining us online and from far away. My name is Brandon Petrie. I'm the chairman of the board for Together LA, and you are listening to the Together LA Listening Tour podcast. And today I have a great joy of welcoming my friend Bill Clark. He's the Chief Advancement Officer for A21. Welcome, Bill. Glad you're here.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. Excited to be with you.
Yeah, you guys have a lot of great initiatives coming up, especially as we approach the Super Bowl, which, by the way, is being held in Los Angeles and hosted by the Rams, who are playing in the Super Bowl. So we couldn't be more excited as a city to celebrate this hopeful victory in a few days. But welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank
Tell
you.
us a little bit about A21 and your role and what you guys do.
Great. So A21 was founded in 2008 by Nick and Christine Kane. It's an anti-trafficking organization. We were currently so it started in 2008 in one location in Greece. Christine Kane had seen these pictures of missing children, had looked into it and found out that they had been trafficked. She'd never heard about trafficking, but in just response said, so we need to do something. So they launched it in 2008 in Greece, and it's grown to be in 19 locations in 14 countries. We do that, all the sort of aspects of combating human trafficking. So we do a lot on the prevention side. We identify folks actually who are victims of human trafficking and work with local authorities to get them out of the situations. And we do a lot with aftercare. And I've been with A21 for about 2.5 years, but I've been actually in the fight against human trafficking since 2005. Kind of the early days where people hadn't actually didn't have much awareness about it, but we're deeply encouraged that we just see more and more people becoming aware of what's happening and learning they can do something about it. And that's kind of my role. My role is to build this huge movement of people. So there's estimate about 40 million people globally who are actually enslaved to some form of human trafficking, and that's more than any time in human history. But if we just get 1% of people in the world to care about it, we would have twice as many advocates as we have people who are enslaved. So my job is to get to that tipping point, to kind of grow this movement of people who would actually say, hey, not on our watch. This is not acceptable. So excited to be here with you and share more about our work and ways people can partner.
Yeah, I love that. Where are you guys based out of right now?
I'm based out of Orange County, California. We have some staff here. We have staff in Dallas, and then we have staff some in DC, and then in 13 other countries around the world. So in Africa, Latin America, quite a bit in Europe.
Yeah, so you're global for sure, but you have a very strong presence here in Southern California, which is fantastic. Tell us a little bit about the distinctives of A21. There's other human trafficking organizations that do all sorts of different things, from legal work to policing and post ministry work past that. Tell us what you guys do in particular.
Yeah, so we do have, so the way we think about human trafficking is this cycle. So people are vulnerable, then they get exploited. And even if they get out of the exploitation, they often get re-victimized. So we've built our model around that cycle of human trafficking to see at each point, can we break it? So we're actually working on each of those elements. And so for the vulnerability part, we have all of these prevention resources that we've designed. That could be everything from like a digital safety guide. So people are protected, allowed to not be trafficked, to a safe relationship guide. Often in the US, how people get trafficked is a lover boy method, where someone pretends to be interested in someone romantically, but actually turns that into a trafficking situation. So we have all these, we have a curriculum for high school students to identify human trafficking. We have a play-based like curriculum for 6 to 12-year-olds that can be used at a Girl Scouts, a Boy Scouts, YMCA, any place that works with young children, so that kids themselves could know their rights. We do a lot on that kind of, let's get around those who are vulnerable and protect them. And then on the exploitation side, the way we actually, and different groups do different ways. So how do you identify victims? We run hotlines. So in 3 countries, we don't run the one in the US, Polaris and NICNIC run those, but outside the US, we run 3 hotlines, Greece, Bulgaria, and South Africa. And that's how we actually get tips and then use those tips to work with local authorities. And even in the US, though we don't run the hotlines, we run campaigns. We have this campaign called Can You See Me that actually shows people what are warning signs of human trafficking. So they actually can call a tip line. And we push through that, the Polaris and the hotline. So we do that. We also have, in addition to doing that to identify and rescue victims, we have in Southeast Asia these child advocacy centers to actually help with the prosecution of those who are traffickers, especially of minors. So often children are get out of human trafficking, but the experience of working through the judicial system is very traumatizing. And so it makes it very difficult for the child and hard to do a prosecution. So we've created this advocacy center where a forensically trained social worker collects their story. They collect it on video so the kids never have to go to court. We worked with the FBI, Homeland Security, other international agencies so that video evidence can be used in 120 courts around the world. So someone flies into Southeast Asia, let's say from LA, to have sex with a child. We can collect that evidence and actually have them tried in the US without that child being re-trafficked, re-traumatized again. And then again, we do a lot with the restoration of survivors so they're not re-victimized. So the concept called freedom centers, and these are community-based programs where every survivor has a social worker, and we say, hey, what's your journey? What would you want for your restoration? And then we leverage all the services in the community, whether that's like they may not be maybe an educational center or a training center. We'll leverage that for our survivors, and they typically are in that program for about 2 years towards getting a place where they're independent. So we have about 5 East Freedom Centers around the world. We have in the U.S. one in North Carolina. We're just opening one in Dallas. And it's a best in class. We won the award from the White House in 2020 for this Freedom Center model in North Carolina that we started. So we're really working on each segment um, of this cycle of human trafficking to try to end it. But we actually, the last thing to say is that we only use the segment that's needed in the community. So again, if someone has a hotline, we're not replicating it. If there is already aftercare services, we're just partnering with them. So we just deploy the piece of our programs that's for the biggest gap in the Pacific community.
That's fantastic. And that's a huge undertaking, by the way. And for some of us, it might feel like it's overwhelming. How would you say the individual family, the individual person can get involved and tackle one piece? Where would you have us enter into
Yeah,
A21?
it's great. I do think on the probably the awareness prevention side is the most accessible and the way people can have pretty significant impact. Again, we do have, for instance, we have a parent guide on how to protect your children from being trafficked online. And we also have a video called Secrets that shows how someone actually, it's a simulation of a young girl being trafficked while she's sitting in her living room.
Hmm.
And all the online sort of steps of how that happens, how they get kind of groomed into that. And actually, we developed that scenario with law enforcement. He said, "Oh, that's actually these are based on cases that we've had, so it's very accurate." So that's a very practical thing like a family could do, or a church could actually give that to all the parents in the congregation. We also have a digital safety guide for students, um, but also other practical ways. Another way you could think about it is who are vulnerable populations in your community. So definitely, foster children would be a vulnerable population. Probably refugees or immigrants would be potentially a vulnerable population. And then how can individuals or churches come around those groups with some education and prevention resources? So we have this safe employment guide. So if you're working with an immigrant community, how do you know if that job's a real job or a trafficking situation? So we have these resources, and all of our resources are free. We really believe that we'll do the work around the world, but we actually need everybody. So we create all our resources to be something people can use in their own community. Um, we also have another a way you can participate and create awareness. We have this Walk for Freedom, which is an annual event we do in 500 communities around the world. And we do it in LA as well, where people gather. This year will be October 15th, 2022. And everybody gathers in a very like public area, and we do this walk to create awareness about human trafficking. It's been very effective. There's a lot of folks who um, don't know about it, who learn about the walk, learn about human trafficking through the walk. I participated last year in Fort Worth, and a couple pulled me aside who were bystanders saying, "I saw human trafficking actually a couple weeks ago. I didn't know what to do."
Mm.
They say, "Oh, great, here's the hotline you could call next time." Um, so there's very practical ways for people to create that awareness, and to do some prevention, especially in vulnerable communities.
A lot of folks that we run into feel like human trafficking takes place overseas. That's obviously not the case, and sometimes they feel like it takes place with vulnerable immigrant communities here. Um, that's obviously not the only case too. Can you give us
Mhm.
a few data points about who you guys are working with, how you're finding them? What are some of those tell points that might make us recognize, like the couple that saw you in the march and said they saw it, they didn't know what to do?
Yeah. So a few things. One, I would say for California, if you look at stats for the national hotline, California has the most calls.
Hmm.
So there is definitely a significant amount in the U.S. So definitely a significant amount of human trafficking happening in California. In the U.S., more than 100,000 children are sold for sex each year. That's a stat from ECPAC USA, but they've kind of researched that. Um, and then this is an important one: 83% of sex trafficking victims in the U.S. are U.S. citizens. So there is some trafficking of foreign nationals into the U.S. who are trafficked, certainly. Um, uh, and there are some people very vulnerable who are immigrants, but there's a lot of trafficking of folks who are U.S. citizens. Um, in the U.S., again, as I mentioned earlier, often, let's say for sex trafficking, that can happen online. So that's one place of vulnerability. But again, I mentioned earlier this lover boy method. So that's why our safe employment guide is helpful. How do you know a relationship is a safe relationship? And what are the signs that it's unsafe in terms of that person isolating that person they're with, and closing them out from their friends, becoming increasingly controlling over time? So there are some signs in that way. Um, we also have a "Can You See Me" campaign that we do that helps people identify, just in general, what are the signs of human trafficking, and that can be uh, people who don't have their identification, or people who um, some different medical places have provide opportunities when someone goes into doctor's office, where they come in with somebody else who's always with them. So some medical practices have done something where, like, when, let's say, someone goes and gives a urine sample, they'll have two pens, and they'll say, "Hey, with that pen, if you're safe, write your name on that sample in this color. But if you're unsafe right now, write it in this color." So just providing opportunities, and we do a lot behind frontline training of law enforcement, of hotels to identify the warning signs to medical professionals. That's one way to kind of um, in sort of the day-to-day life, just trying to see what stands out and is concerning.
Yeah, that's really, really good to help folks see the signs. If we're not aware, we don't know, right?
Right.
Speaking of training in some of the hotels and being able to see some of that, we've known for a long time. If you've paid any attention to the news in the last 10 or 15 years, you know that the Super Bowl actually is while it's a fun and kind of America's holiday, it's also a horrible reality for many folks who are caught in human trafficking. You guys have a plan uh, to assist in some of that over this Super Bowl weekend, just in a couple days. Can you expound on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so we've been partnering with a group that we helped found called It's a Penalty, that kind of leverages major sporting events. As you said, there could be an increase in trafficking, so trying to address that. And then also, because there's so much publicity around it, just to also leverage the event in general to create more awareness about human trafficking. So you're looking to protect people during that time, and there's lots of people coming to the city for all different motives. And you're trying to leverage it to create awareness more broadly. And so we've done a few things. We created a 30-second video with It's a Penalty, featuring NFL players. So anybody flying in on
Mm.
American Airlines will see that actually as they fly to the LA area. We worked with Southwest Airlines inside in all their sort of airport kiosks for them to actually play that video. We used that video actually with Airbnb training of their hosts around this time, so they're aware of the potential for human trafficking. We also did a training with the hotel association for local hotels to help them uh, identify what are the signs of human trafficking, who would you report that to. We actually printed about 3,900 of these posters that were put inside hotels throughout LA. And those posters were put where the folks coming in to stay there could see those. So other uh, people staying at the hotels can identify, but also just for the employees. So if they see things like a maid may see something where it looks like that person doesn't have free mobility, feels like that person is being controlled with someone. Well, they'd actually normally may see that and see that's strange, but if they saw that poster and knew who they could call, then they could make an anonymous tip about that. We worked with Uber, so we
Hmm.
printed out these 2,500 of these rearview mirror tags that give the national hotline. So people are in an Uber, they can be educated about that, know who to call. We actually put 1,000 of these posters inside bathrooms in LAX. So people are flying in, um, and they're in a vulnerable situation, and they're in the bathroom, they could see that and actually know who to call to get some help. And then we did some trainings for different organizations. And let me last thing to say, just the Super Bowl committee has been super engaged with us. So they've actually supported all this. They've allowed us to be part of the NFL experience. So leading up to the Super Bowl, if you know this, there's this huge um, gathering. About 100,000 people come through to learn more about the Super Bowl and celebrate the coming game. And in there was a booth to highlight human trafficking
Hmm.
um, that was supported by the Super Bowl committee and this Super Bowl Alliance Against Human Trafficking. So lots of different
Great.
touch points just to create more awareness and opportunities to report either the person who's in a vulnerable situation or someone who sees something.
Yeah. There are, like I mentioned at the very beginning, there are a number of organizations that work in this area, human trafficking. One is the Human Trafficking Institute. Another one is IJM. How are you guys partnering together with these other ministries?
Yeah, we're actually so a number of the anti-trafficking organizations are all working together around the Super Bowl. So we're all playing different roles and sort of using our base to educate people about the issues. But in general, we're actually also working on some larger collaborations. So we're in conversations with IJM right now to do something. July 30th is sort of the World Day Against Human Trafficking. So we're in conversations about um, hey, what would it look like for us to collaborate leading up to that day? And not just IJAM and A21, but can we invite others, whether it's a local anti-trafficking group or an international one, to start using our voice together. So as we speak together, just to make it a louder voice to say, hey, this really is happening in our world. It's a global crisis, and you can do something about it. So we're planning that. We're hoping that this will be the uh, first kind of like larger collaboration we're doing with awareness. We're hoping that kind of takes off and becomes an annual event where we um, can just increase. And again, you don't need everyone to care about it. If you just got 1% of the people in the world to care and do something, um, you'd have 80 million advocates. You'd have 80 million people um, who would actually be identifying victims. You have 80 million people calling their representatives saying, hey, we should um, make this a priority legislatively. So yeah, so we're excited to partner with. We're all friends, all these different. We all know each other. I worked for IJAM for years, and so we're just starting to get our muscles together. Of like, hey, how do we actually start really building a unified movement against human trafficking?
Fantastic. Fantastic. One of the things that we often say that drives Together LA is that we're a movement of organizations, churches, and ministries that seek to ask and answer the question, how can we best love the city? When you think about engaging in cities, um, what is it that you guys are? How would you describe it as partnering with other ministries, doing the ministry that you're doing in this specific field? Are ways that you're how do I want to ask it? obviously ending human trafficking is a way not only to love the city, but love the created order that God established.
Hmm.
Um, when you think about your mission and your call into this ministry,
Hmm.
what is it that drives you? What is it that's pushing you? Is it the
Hmm.
injustice? Is it the aspect that that God's glory can be seen? Is it restoring created order? What is it? I'm
Hmm.
going to take you a little deeper theologically on that, but give me a
Yeah,
little bit of background for you.
yeah. I think for me, it's a conviction that, and this is me personally. So A21 is a organization that works with people of all different backgrounds and faiths and seculars. So we're a large movement. But for my own personal faith motivation, I think it's the idea that when someone is actually harming someone, they're assaulting them, they're enslaving them, and which also is as brutal as you can imagine, of someone being sexually assaulted 12 to 15 times a day, someone being beaten if they don't hit some quota that enforce labor. It is as brutal as you can imagine, but I don't see that for it's just a sin against a person. I think it's a sin against God because what those traffickers say to the people that they're victimizing is that you are worthless,
Mm,
that no one cares about you. What God says is like, no, I knit you in your mother's womb. You are wonderfully made. You bear my image. So actually, what traffickers are saying is they're calling God a liar. They're saying what you say is good is not good. So they're not just sinning against a person; they're sinning against God. And I think that's why God is so. You see in scriptures, um, uh, right? He's so impassioned about uh, um, injustice and calls his people to seek in Isaiah, right, 117, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, because they're actually saying something about God himself. Even Jesus, I think it's Matthew 23:23, is talking about the religious leaders of the day caring about all these small things of, of, of religious order. And we've forgotten the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So if Jesus is summing up the things that must matter to him most, justice is one of those things. I think because he has an intimate connection to every single person being abused, right? He made them and they are
mhm,
made in his image. So for me, it's that not just kind of doing a good thing, but actually it is inherent to what it means to be a follower of Jesus, to care for people and see them the way that God sees them. So that's what, and I do feel like for folks that is really important for believers, not just to feel like, oh, this is a good thing to do, but to have a deeper understanding of the biblical mandate to seek justice. And this is inherent in the same way we're to be holy, in the same way we're to share our faith. We are called to be people of justice. And scripture is full of examples of that.
yeah, I love that answer because that's right. That's what actually motivates and changes the heart rather than just an obligation to do for good, for goodness sake. It's wonderful. It's good, but seeing that justice piece played back into an understanding of God's creation, great order, is beautiful. So I'm really thankful you guys are doing that, leading that charge. As we approach this week, what are ways that we can pray for you? What are ways that we can
Mm,
encourage others to get involved? And what are ways that what are some of the tangible goals? Maybe these are three separate questions.
yeah.
How can we pray for you guys? What are ways that others can get involved? And then what are some tangible outcomes that you'd like to see, particularly after this weekend?
Yeah, I would say that ways you can pray for us is just opportunities to engage people. Uh, us and all the organizations out there. Um, and they're you really pray for just divine opportunities to meet people who are maybe in situations of being vulnerable. Um, you can pray for folks who have actually seen whether they've seen one of these posters at a hotel they're at, or they've seen something in an Uber, or they've seen something at their Airbnb, or they've seen whatever they've seen it. That actually, I think what's challenging for people is, well, I saw something kind of funny, but maybe I'm wrong.
Hmm.
Well, we want to switch that to say, well, maybe you're right. And for folks to call and just take that risk is no harm in just saying, actually, I saw this, a little bit concerning. And the folks who run the hotlines are quite professional to track those things down. So there's no harm in actually calling, identifying that. So those are some prayer requests. I think we're hoping also, in a broader sense, that the city's just awakened to this is happening in our neighborhoods. This is happening in our communities, and not just this one time of year. It's happening all year. Um, and that what we hope is that people will decide that, hey, I'm going to make this a cause for my life. Um, that there's more people enslaved today than any time in human history. What's my role to play in that in my community? Um, and again, like for instance, a lot of folks who are trafficked in the U.S. come out of the foster care system because it is a very vulnerable community. Well, how can your organization or church come around those folks when they actually age out of the foster care system? What is that? Who is coming around those who are vulnerable? So it's not always just identifying those who are being trafficked. It's also deciding to come around those people who are vulnerable to be trafficked. So there's a lot. So it's kind of like it's not what you should do, but what you could do. There's an endless list of coming around people who are vulnerable to make sure that they are not taken advantages by others. So we kind of progress in general is just that people get awakened and they get creative. Our job is to be a catalyst to people to awaken to the issues, but I think it's where the movement will take off when people actually have that ownership, and they just kind of decide to get out there and identify the issues themselves and come up with solutions.
Yeah, it's good. You've mentioned a couple times the hotlines. How can we find A21 and how do we find the hotlines?
Yeah. So you can Polaris. So you can find it. Go to Polaris's website or National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, are the two hotlines in the United States. You can also to our A21 site, and we also list all the hotlines, not just in the U.S. but around the world. So you can easily find that on our site as well. Um, and again, maybe just encourage people listening. I think it. Even if you just have a general sense of something and you don't have details, you can call the hotline. They can actually tell you what to do, go look for next if you're around that situation. Maybe it's something in your neighborhood that seems a bit sketchy, and maybe you don't feel comfortable calling the police. That's the other thing is the hotlines are not run by law enforcement. It's completely safe to call, and they can help you kind of think through what would be the next things I could do to collect evidence, and they can walk you through that process.
That's great. That's great. Bill, thank you for joining us. Thanks for the work that you guys are doing. Thanks for the work that you're called to in particular. It's always a joy to be with you, whether we're meeting in Pasadena or whether we're meeting in online and in this space. But we really do cherish A21 and your relationship.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's joy. I love what you guys are doing, mobilizing the city, and just feel like, and mobilizing people of faith to take ownership for their city, to be folks working for good. So it's deeply encouraging to us. I'm thrilled to be with you today.
Yeah, it's a joy to be with you and to partner with you. And I look forward to catching up after the Super Bowl. And I look forward to seeing how not only Together LA, but our local churches, organizations, and ministry can adapt some of these practices you've mentioned. Thanks,
Sounds
Bill.
great. Thanks, Brandon. Take care.